Story: The Untouched Grave. In a remote village nestled between rolling hills and peaceful rivers, there is an ancient house that everyone living in the village has heard of, but no one dares to approach. The house is located next to an old cemetery, where the graves have been covered with moss over time. The tombstones are faintly dotted with names that no one remembers clearly. However, that very house is said to be the place where strange and mysterious events have occurred that the villagers still tell each other about. The story begins on an autumn day when Ton, a young man from the city visiting his grandmother, decides to explore this house. Although he has heard strange stories about the house and the unexplainable events, Ton feels attracted to it. He thinks that it is all just rumors, and there is nothing to be afraid of if he just wants to look and find out. Ton found the old house after walking through the old cemetery. The house was built of bricks and stones, with broken windows and moldy wooden doors. The roof was covered with layers of green moss, making the house look as if it had been abandoned for a long time. However, for some reason, Ton felt a strange attraction, as if the house was calling him. He stepped inside, feeling a cold air enveloping him. The walls inside the house were dusty. There was no light except for the faint rays of sunlight that filtered through the cracks in the windows. Everything was so quiet that Ton could clearly hear his own footsteps echoing in the quiet space. Passing through a corridor, he arrived at the living room. In the dim room, among the old furniture, there was a long wooden table with an old clock on it. Ton walked closer to the clock, feeling a cold air coming from it. The watch had a pitch-black face, reflecting nothing but darkness, making him feel a strange unease. He touched the watch, and suddenly, a feeling like something was stirring in the air, enveloping him. Suddenly, a sound came from behind, like someone's footsteps. Ton turned around, but saw no one. There was only a faint shadow, drawing strange shapes on the wall. His heart pounded, and he quickly turned to the door. But before he could step outside, a voice rang out from the watch, as if someone was whispering from the darkness, "Don't go." Ton turned back, and this time, blurry images appeared in the watch. He saw the scene of a man and a woman, both standing side by side in front of a grave. But the strange thing was that they had no faces, just blurry, indistinct shapes. Suddenly, the grave they were standing next to began to glow strangely, emitting a cold blue light. Ton felt a strong pull from the clock, as if he couldn't take his eyes off it. An invisible force pulled him closer. He felt like there was some kind of connection between him and the images on the clock. The strange feeling grew stronger, as if he was being drawn into another world. "Don't look there," the voice said again, this time clearer, like a warning. Ton couldn't resist. He continued to look at the clock. A new scene appeared. The whole family stood in front of the grave. The man suddenly turned back to look at him with a cold gaze, then stepped back into the grave. Ton tried to turn around and run, but when he turned back, he realized he was no longer in the room. He stood in a large area, surrounded by old graves, all with unmarked tombstones. In front of him was the family grave he had just seen in the watch. A feeling of confusion filled the air, and once again, a voice rang out from behind him, "You've come here. Now, you won't be able to get out." Ton turned around, but saw no one. He only saw darkness, covering everything. The graves around him began to glow faintly, and from those graves, the silhouettes of the deceased emerged, with expressionless, silent faces. They walked around, not saying a word, but their eyes seemed to be staring at him, as if they wanted to tell him something that he couldn't understand. A cold feeling spread from the ground, as if something was pulling him down. Ton tried to run, but couldn't escape. The blurry figures continued to move towards him, and the light from the grave seemed to fade away, enveloping him. Just when Ton thought he could not bear it any longer, a loud noise rang out. He woke up, lying on his back on the ground, outside the house. The rain had stopped, and the sun had begun to rise. He turned to look at the house, but it had disappeared, leaving only an empty space. Ton did not tell anyone about what he had experienced, but from that day on, he never dared to go near the old cemetery again. And every time he looked in the mirror, he felt a gaze watching him from behind, as if the house